what would be some of the do's and don'ts with this approach? Bearing this in mind, as a hiring leader, Ozzy, I would be curious in this, as you're continuing to build out Monarch Money, the teams, what is something that you've thought about now with this new landscape?
Yeah, and the lens, you talk about the Great Resignation, and the way I think that's kind of manifesting in itself, in addition to what Jen talked about in terms of shifting power dynamic, is also shifting the types of trust people have. Because taking a new job or even interviewing with a company is a big commitment, and big commitments require trust. And for the past few years, people may be trusted in like, all right, there's this like ecosystem, especially in tech, there's this like VC market, and I can trust that if this company has raised a lot of money, then that company is like a good company and doing a good job. And we were kind of all like, making these assumptions on various levels. And then suddenly it's like everything is exposed. And so what can I trust? And the fundamentals of trust are always people, right? So it's always like, if I talk to someone at a company, someone I know and I trust, and they describe a company a certain way, good or bad, that's something I can trust because I trust the person, and the trust is kind of like transferable in that regards. And so the trust has shifted a lot more to people than to like the market or institutions or how much money someone has raised or how much press they're getting. And so in my mind, everything is essentially network recruiting, because even when we do, as an example, there's a candidate I recently hired, and the story there was I was doing outbound recruiting, and I reached out, and there was one candidate who responded, and she said, this, sounds like a great place to work. I'm not ready to move right now, but my colleague, like, he's thinking about switching roles, and based on what you described, I think you should talk to him. And we ended up hiring him. We ended up, having a conversation. We told him more about what we were doing. We interviewed him. It worked out. And so even though at the core, it was like an outbound recruiting strategy, anyone you talk to can be part of your network and can relay, your pitch or your company. But going back to that question of, well, what do you do? What are we doing? We're big fans of like transparency. And to Jen's point from earlier of that power dynamic, we try to keep that balance throughout the process. So we're not asking candidates to do these like crazy interview processes before we tell them about the company. We're not asking them, in the first call, if someone is serious, I will open up our like company revenue dashboard and be like, all right, here's how our growth looks like. Here's where we're doing well. Here's where we're struggling a little bit. And just volunteering that information in a world where a lot of people don't, and being as transparent as you can be will go a long way. And there's, a lot of other things as well, like letting them, have conversations with other people on the team. So it's not just like, hey, for the first portion of this process, we are interviewing you, we have the upper hand, and then we give you the offer, and suddenly like you have the offer in hand, and now we have to go try to sell you. But like keeping everything balanced throughout the process, that helps build trust. And I think shows people that like, they're like, all right, if this is how a company runs its hiring process, then presumably their culture is in line with that as well. And working there, the experience of working there would be similar to the experience I'm getting going through this interviewing or this hiring process.
I'll jump in there to add on. Ozzy and I are obviously very philosophically aligned, having written on this stuff together. But yeah, more about trust. So it's not unlike dating, right? If you have a terrible first date, it's not going to get better. If the person earlier in the stages of a relationship is not treating you well, putting in the effort, very, very unlikely, because the early stages are when you're supposed to both show your best self, really do the courting process, make each other hopefully feel good, set each other up for success. So hiring is very similar in that I think this is a really key that I think a lot of folks miss. Every single candidate, even if you end up rejecting them, should have a great process. Every single candidate, even if they end up ultimately not being the right fit, should still feel like they were given a really fair shot. They felt seen as a person. They got to really showcase their skills and hopefully learn something. This is hard because a lot of companies who don't necessarily, let's say, have the competencies or the process built in-house yet, they think like, well, we can't do that with everyone. Well, if you can't do that, why would anyone interview with you? Especially the candidates that you want. Like Ozzy was saying, like it's a huge commitment. Like top talent, however you define that, they're not trying to, in their spare time, like, oh, you know what, I'm bored. Let me go interview some companies for funsies. So when we look at this problem, okay, you're telling me I need to be treating everyone well, radical, but okay. But I don't have the bandwidth, the time, the space to do so. How do I actually do that? So that is what a lot of us are saying earlier about transparency. So you're actually drawing in the right people and treating everybody well, which means really putting in the right investments so that, yes, at the top of funnel, when it's just referrals or resume screen, you don't have to be spending a ton of time on people. But by the time you get to later stages, you're investing more and more time with each other. So you're really building on that relationship and treating each other as humans. If a lot of companies are finding like, well, this is a waste of time, I feel like I'm speaking with like just people that are totally not a fit, candidates are terrible, what are the good ones? That's not the candidate's fault. That's the company's fault. That means you're not filtering well. That means you're not drawing in the right people. So I'm just, I can talk about this concept of trust in in hiring dynamics, both in relationship dynamics, all day long, because as companies, we have a responsibility and the power to really lead on this front. But unfortunately, what I see a lot of it is, blaming the candidates for not being the perfect fit for me. And it's like, that's not their fault. That's on you.